The world knew him as Harrison Montgomery III, the titan of industry, a man whose name was synonymous with power. In the hushed, wood-paneled courtroom, he was about to finalize the easiest deal of his life, divorcing the woman he'd cast aside. He saw her as a relic of his past, a beautiful accessory he no longer required. But he overlooked one crucial detail. He forgot who she was before she became Mrs. Montgomery. He forgot the promise he made, the secret they buried, and the foundation upon which his entire empire was built. The court was ready to rubber stamp his victory. But they and he were about to learn that his greatest asset was never his to begin with. The air in Courtroom 4B of the Manhattan Supreme Court was thick with the scent of old leather lemon polish and suffocating tension. It was a cold, sterile environment, a stark contrast to the opulent world Harrison Montgomery III inhabited. For him, this room was not a chamber of justice. It was a stage for his final triumphant performance in the long-running play of his marriage. He sat at the respondents' table, a portrait of bespoke arrogance. His suit, a deep charcoal grey, probably cost more than the court stenographer earned in a year. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his jaw set with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no, and truly believed it. Beside him, his lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Mr. Abernathy, shuffled papers with performative diligence. They exuded an aura of invincibility of a battle already won. And why shouldn't they? Harrison was the founder and CEO of Montgomery Global Enterprises MGE, a sprawling conglomerate with tentacles in everything from tech to real estate. The media gathered like vultures in the gallery had already painted the narrative, the brilliant, long-suffering billionaire finally shedding his quiet, unassuming wife, Genevieve. Genevieve Dubois sat opposite them. To the casual observer, she looked every bit the part the world had assigned her. She was elegant, poised, but with a fragility about her, like a porcelain doll that had been left on a shelf too long. Her simple navy blue dress was tasteful, but screamed modesty compared to Harrison's power suit. Her counsel, Miss Diana Reyes, was a sharp, focused woman with an unnerving stillness, a stark contrast to Abernathy's blustering. "Mr. Montgomery," Abernathy began, his voice booming with practiced authority, "has been more than generous. He has offered a settlement that would allow Mrs. Montgomery," he corrected himself with a slight smirk, "Ms. Dubois, to live in extreme comfort for the remainder of her life. A penthouse on the Upper East Side, a lifetime stipend that most would consider a fortune, and a collection of art and jewelry. This is an act of goodwill, Your Honor, for their 25 years together." The judge, a weary-looking woman named Judge Carmichael, peered over her glasses. And Ms. Dubois's response to this goodwill? Diana Reyes stood. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the room's heavy atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. "We reject the offer, Your Honor, wholly and unequivocally." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Harrison shifted in his seat, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He leaned over and whispered to Abernathy, "What is she playing at? Triple the offer if you have to. Just end this." Abernathy rose again. "Your Honor, with all due respect to my learned colleague, her client is being emotional. This is a simple matter. A non-contributory spouse in a long-term marriage. Mr. Montgomery built his empire from the ground up through his own sweat and genius. Ms. Dubois was a wonderful hostess, a supportive partner, and for that, she is being compensated handsomely. There is no legal basis to demand more." He gestured dismissively toward Genevieve, as if she were a piece of furniture being haggled over. What could she possibly claim to have contributed to a multi-billion-dollar corporation? Did she attend board meetings? Did she negotiate deals in Tokyo Num? She planned dinner parties. The humiliation was a physical blow. Genevieve could feel the color rising in her cheeks, the stares of the journalists boring into her back. She looked at Harrison, at the man she had once loved, with every fiber of her being. He wouldn't even meet her gaze. He was busy examining his platinum cufflinks board. For 25 years, she had played the part. The perfect, smiling wife standing just behind his shoulder in photographs. The gracious host who charmed investors and politicians. The silent partner in life, if not in business. He had taken her youth, her dreams, and molded her into what he needed her to be. And now he was discarding her with less thought than he would give to selling off a poorly performing subsidiary. "Ms. Reyes," Judge Carmichael said, her patience thinning. "If you are rejecting this substantial offer, you must have a counter-proposal. On what grounds do you base your client's claim to anything more?" This was it, the moment she had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure for the past 6 months. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Diana. Diana Reyes took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch, drawing the focus of every single person in the room. "Your Honor," she said, her voice dropping to a lower, more serious register. "My client is not seeking a larger settlement. She is not seeking alimony or a penthouse. What she is seeking is what is rightfully hers." Abernathy scoffed. "And what might that be? The stationery?" Diana ignored him, her eyes locked on the judge. "Mr. Abernathy is correct in one regard. My client did not negotiate deals in Tokyo, but he is mistaken about her contribution. She didn't just plan dinner parties. She provided the very seed from which MGE grew." Harrison finally looked up, a shadow of confusion clouding his features. Abernathy laughed outright. "This is absurd. A desperate last-ditch attempt to muddy the waters. Your Honor, where is the proof of this fantastical claim?" "The proof," Diana said, her voice ringing with clarity, "is in the foundation of the company itself. My client, Ms. Genevieve Dubois, is not a non-contributory spouse. She was and is the original silent partner in this entire enterprise." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle before delivering the final devastating blow. "As such, we are not asking for a piece of Mr. Montgomery's fortune. We are here to claim what has always belonged to my client, 50% of the company's stock." The courtroom fell silent. It was not a gradual hush, but an abrupt total cessation of sound, as if a switch had been flipped. The reporters froze pens, hovering over notepads. Abernathy's jaw hung slack, his face a mask of disbelief. Judge Carmichael's eyes widened, her weary demeanor vanishing, replaced by a look of intense, focused shock. But the most profound reaction was Harrison's. He didn't gasp or shout. He simply went still. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a waxy, pale grey. His confident posture crumbled, and for the first time in decades, Harrison Montgomery III looked utterly, terrifyingly small. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finally meeting Genevieve's across the gulf that separated them. In them, she saw not just shock, but the dawning, horrifying light of recognition. The ghost he thought he had buried forever had just risen from the grave in the middle of Courtroom 4B. The year was 1998. The world was obsessed with the .com bubble. But Harrison Montgomery, then just a fiercely ambitious young man with more charisma than capital, had a different vision. He saw the future not in ephemeral websites, but in tangible assets in logistics and infrastructure that the new digital world would desperately need. He had the blueprint for what would become Montgomery Global Enterprises, a brilliant, intricate plan. But it was just that, a plan on paper. He met Genevieve Dubois at a small off-campus art gallery. She wasn't part of his world of Ivy League mixers and trust fund cocktail parties. She was a postgraduate history student, quiet, studious, with an intellect that burned brightly behind her unassuming eyes. Her father, a shrewd French immigrant who had built a small but successful import-export business in Louisiana, had recently passed away, leaving her a modest but significant inheritance. Harrison was immediately smitten, not just by her gentle beauty, but by her mind. She listened to his grand ideas, not with the fawning adoration he was used to, but with incisive questions. She saw the potential, but she also saw the gaps. "It's brilliant, Harrison," she had told him one evening, sitting in her small, book-filled apartment that smelled of old paper and coffee. "But your projections rely on having your own shipping fleet. You can't afford that. Leasing will eat all your profits in the first 5 years." He had deflated, frustrated. "It's the chicken and the egg, Jen. I need the fleet to get the contracts, but I need the contracts to get the financing for the fleet." Genevieve had gone quiet, tracing the patterns on a faded Persian rug her father had imported years ago. The inheritance had been sitting in a low-yield trust waiting. Her father had always told her, "Don't just save money, Genevieve. Make it work. Find a horse with strong legs and bet on it." She looked at Harrison. He was brilliant driven, and she was falling deeply in love with him. He was the strongest horse she had ever seen. "I have it," she said softly. "Have what another critique?" he asked a little too sharply. "The money," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor of excitement and fear in her chest. "My inheritance. It's enough. Enough to buy 2 second-hand freighters from a yard in Baltimore my father used to work with. It's enough to secure the first lease on a warehouse in New Jersey. It's the seed, Harrison. The cornerstone." He stared at her dumbfounded. The sum was more than he could have dreamed of securing from any bank. It was the key, the one thing that stood between his brilliant idea and reality. He was on his knees in front of her in an instant, taking her hands, his eyes blazing with a fervor that felt like love. That was love twisted up with his all-consuming ambition. "Genevieve," he breathed, "you believe in me that much." "I believe in us," she corrected him gently. "This will be our venture, a partnership." They drafted the agreement themselves, sitting at her small kitchen table. It was a simple document, full of the hopeful, naive language of 2 people building a future together. They called their fledgling company Dubois Montgomery Shipping and Logistics. Her capital injection was documented in exchange for a 50% stake in the new entity. They signed it, their signatures overlapping slightly, a physical symbol of their union. For safekeeping, Genevieve placed the original document, along with the bank draft confirmation, in a safe deposit box her father had maintained for years. The first 2 years were a whirlwind. They worked side by side. Harrison was the face, the negotiator, the rainmaker. Genevieve was the strategist, the analyst, the one who managed the books and ensured the 2 freighters were always running, always profitable. She wasn't just a supportive girlfriend. She was a co-founder, a true partner in every sense of the word. Then they got married. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, at first things began to change. "Darling," Harrison said a few months after their wedding, Dubois Montgomery Shipping and Logistics sounds a bit clunky, don't you think? We're expanding. We need something bolder, something with more power. He proposed Montgomery Global Enterprises. It sounded grand important. Genevieve, still basking in the glow of being a newlywed, agreed. It was just a name, after all. Next came the board. Jen, these are rough men, oil tycoons and shipping magnates. A boardroom is no place for you. You're too gentle. Let me handle the sharks. You manage our home, create a sanctuary for me to come back to. That's the more important job. He framed it as an act of protection of chivalry. She stepped away from the day-to-day operations, trusting him completely. The lie was not a single shattering event, but a slow, creeping erosion. Her name came off the letterhead. The company was rebranded. New, slick corporate lawyers redrafted the Articles of Incorporation, listing Harrison Montgomery III as the sole founder and 100% shareholder. When Genevieve, pregnant with their first and only child, had asked about the original agreement, he had kissed her forehead and laughed. That old thing, Jen, that was just a formality between us before we were married. We're one entity now. My success is your success. What's mine is yours. Why would we need a piece of paper to prove that it's all in the family? She was young in love and about to be a mother. She let it go. It seemed churlish to argue about paperwork when they were building a life of family. She trusted him. That was her greatest mistake. Over the years, the story became Harrison's alone. In interviews, he spoke of his humble beginnings, of the risks he took, of how he scraped together every penny he had to buy his first ship. Genevieve, standing just off camera, would smile and nod. The woman who had handed him his dream on a silver platter had been rewritten, reduced to a footnote, then erased from the corporate history entirely. She was no longer his partner, but his prettiest asset. Her sanctuary became a gilded key, her life a series of parties and charity events designed to bolster his public image. He had not just taken her money and her stake in the company. He had stolen her story, her very identity as a founder, and convinced her it was for her own good. He had buried the truth so deep for so long that he had come to believe the lie himself. Back in the silent courtroom, staring at Harrison's ashen face, Genevieve felt a quarter-century of suppressed rage and hurt solidify into a core of pure, unbending steel. He had forgotten who she was. He had forgotten the girl at the kitchen table, the woman who had bet her entire future on him. But she hadn't forgotten, and she still had the key to the safe deposit box. The courtroom, which had been plunged into an abyss of silence, erupted into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Judge Carmichael slammed her gavel, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. "Order, order in this court!" The reporters in the gallery were practically vibrating thumbs flying across their phone screens. Wife claims half of MGE Empire. The headlines were writing themselves. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a corporate coup d'etat. Mr. Abernathy, recovering from his initial shock, scrambled to his feet. His face flushed a deep, mottled red. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. It's an ambush, a fabrication of the highest order. Where is this supposed agreement? Why has it never been mentioned before this very moment? It's a transparent, desperate ploy." Diana Reyes remained standing, a picture of calm authority. "It is not a ploy, Mr. Abernathy. It is a foundational document of the corporation your client leads. As for its timing, my client was hoping Mr. Montgomery would choose to dissolve their personal union with a modicum of decency and respect for the truth of their shared history. He chose instead to paint her as a gold-digging parasite. His arrogance has forced our hand." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and Harrison visibly flinched at the word arrogance. He was finally speaking his voice, a low, dangerous growl directed at Abernathy. "Fix this. This is your mess. Make it go away." Judge Carmichael leaned forward, her eyes narrowed on Ms. Reyes. "You have made an extraordinary claim, Counselor. The burden of proof is now squarely on your shoulders. You will produce this alleged document." "We will, Your Honor," Diana replied smoothly. "We request a 2-day recess to allow for the retrieval of the original document from a secure bank vault, along with the corresponding financial records of the initial capital transfer." "Objection!" Abernathy shouted. "She's stalling. There is no document. They're going to spend 2 days forging one—" "Mr. Abernathy," the judge warned, her voice laced with ice. "You are bordering on contempt. Accusations of forgery are serious. Unless you have evidence, I suggest you choose your words with extreme care." She turned back to Diana. 2 days. We will reconvene on Friday at 10 a.m. And Ms. Reyes," she added, her gaze unwavering, "you had better come back with more than just a story." The gavel cracked again, and the session was adjourned. Instantly, a mob of journalists surged forward, shouting questions. Harrison, shielded by 2 massive bodyguards who seemed to appear from nowhere, was ushered out a side door, his face a thunderous mask. He didn't look at Genevieve once. As Genevieve and Diana made their way through the scrum, a single question was shouted louder than the rest. "Genevieve, is it true? Did you found MGE?" She paused for a fraction of a second, turned and looked directly into the camera of a major news network. She didn't smile. She simply said, "The truth has a way of coming out before being guided into a waiting car." The moment the car door closed, the steely facade she had maintained crumbled. A deep, shuddering breath escaped her lips. "Did you see his face, Diana?" "I did." Diana said, her own expression grim. "He's not just angry, he's scared. That tells me the document is real and he knows it." "He called it that old thing," Genevieve whispered, the memory stinging like a fresh wound. "He convinced me it was meaningless. He buried me." "Well," Diana said, placing a reassuring hand on her arm, "you're about to be exhumed." Meanwhile, in the back of his armored town car, Harrison was apoplectic. "Abernathy, what in God's name was that? How did you not see this coming? I pay you millions to anticipate everything." Abernathy, sweating profusely, tried to maintain a professional demeanor. "Harrison, this is a bluff, a ghost story. There's no way that document, if it ever existed, is still around. It's been 25 years. We've restructured the company a dozen times since then. The corporate charter is ironclad. You are the sole founder. It's a matter of public record." "Don't tell me about public record," Harrison roared, his voice bouncing off the soundproofed interior. "I was there. The document was real." He paused, his mind racing back through the decades. She kept it. She put it in her father's safe deposit box at a small bank downtown. Crédit Agricole or something like that. Abernathy's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "Good. That's good. We know where it supposedly is. Now we can fight it." He was already formulating a plan, the Abernathy Gambit, as he was privately christening it. "Okay, Harrison. Here's what we do. We don't wait for them to produce it. We go on the offensive. We attack her credibility. We paint her as a bitter, scorned woman, so desperate for revenge that she's willing to commit perjury and fraud. He leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "And we lean on the bank. MGE has accounts with every major financial institution in this city. We find out which one acquired that little French bank. We make some calls. A document that old, it could get lost in an archive. Records can be misplaced. A water pipe could burst in the vault. We create enough doubt, enough procedural chaos, that even if she does produce a piece of paper, it will be tainted." Harrison listened, a slow, cruel smile beginning to form on his lips, replacing the fear. This he understood. This was the language of power, the kind he wielded every day. It wasn't about the truth. It was about who could tell the more convincing story, who could apply the most pressure. "She thinks she can beat me in a courtroom," Harrison said, more to himself than to Abernathy. "I don't lose. I own the damn game." He looked out the tinted window at the city that was his kingdom. "Get it done, Abernathy. Bury that document. Bury her." He had underestimated Genevieve once. He would not make that mistake again. The battle had moved from the courtroom to the shadows, and Harrison Montgomery was infinitely more comfortable fighting in the dark. The next 48 hours were a frantic, high-stakes chess match played across New York City. For Genevieve and Diana, the objective was simple and singular. Retrieve the contents of safe deposit box 412 from the downtown branch of what was now Omnibank, the corporate behemoth that had swallowed Crédit Agricole a decade prior. Their first stop, however, was not the bank. It was a dusty, cluttered apartment in Queens, home to a man named Arthur Finch. Arthur was a retired accountant now in his late 70s, who had been Genevieve's father's most trusted employee. More importantly, he had been the co-signatory on the trust from which the original investment money was drawn. "Arthur, I'm so sorry to bring this to your door," Genevieve said, sitting in his overstuffed armchair. Arthur, a small man with kind eyes, magnified by thick-lensed glasses, waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, child. Your father was like a brother to me. I saw the news. That man, he has a devil's charm, but the balance sheet never lies." He shuffled over to a large filing cabinet. "I kept everything. Your father taught me to. The paper trail is the only trail that can't lie," he'd say. He pulled out a faded manila folder. Inside were the meticulously kept records of the Dubois family trust, including the 1998 wire transfer of $750,000 to the newly formed Dubois Montgomery Shipping and Logistics. "Here," Arthur said, his finger tapping the recipient line. The original sin. Armed with Arthur's pristine records, their confidence soared. The next morning, they arrived at Omnibank. The building was a modern cathedral of glass and steel, a far cry from the quaint neighborhood bank Genevieve remembered. Diana presented their court order to the branch manager, a slick, impeccably dressed man named Mr. Peterson. Peterson's smile was professionally polite, but his eyes were cold. "Of course, Ms. Reyes, Ms. Dubois. If you'll just wait here, I'll personally oversee the retrieval from the legacy vault." They waited. 10 minutes turned into 30. 30 minutes stretched to an hour. Genevieve's anxiety began to bubble. "Something's wrong," she whispered to Diana. Finally, Peterson returned his face a mask of practiced regret. "I am so terribly sorry," he began, the words sounding rehearsed. "There seems to be a problem. We've had a small plumbing issue in the sub-basement where the legacy vaults are stored. A water main break. There's been some damage. The area is currently inaccessible for safety reasons." Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. "A water main break? When?" Just last night, I believe, Peterson said, avoiding her eyes. A most unfortunate coincidence. Diana's expression hardened. A coincidence, Mr. Peterson, MGE moves billions of dollars through this institution. Did Harrison Montgomery or his legal team contact you yesterday? Peterson's professional veneer cracked for a split second. Our client relationships are confidential. I see. Diana said, her voice dangerously quiet. So to be clear, the one vault we need in this entire building just happens to have been in a flood the night after we announced our intention to open it. It was Abernathy's move, a crude but brutally effective one. They had tried to literally wash the evidence away. Genevieve felt a wave of despair. Harrison wasn't just fighting her. He was using the full crushing weight of his empire to erase her past all over again. He won't get away with this. Diana muttered, her mind already working, calculating their next move. A flood that convenient leaves a trail. Maintenance crews, insurance claims, work orders. It's a lie, and we can prove it's a lie, but it will take time we don't have. The judge gave us until tomorrow. They left the bank defeated. The city felt hostile Harrison's power radiating from every skyscraper. As they sat in stunned silence in the car, Genevieve's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Is this Genevieve Dubois?" a man's voice asked. It was raspy, nervous. "Who is this?" "My name doesn't matter. I used to work for MGE, in the archives department. I was let go a few years ago. I heard what's happening." The man took a shaky breath. He won't find what he's looking for in the vault. Genevieve's heart leaped. "What do you mean?" "Montgomery. He's an arrogant man, but he's not a fool. He wouldn't leave a loose end like that. Not forever." The man hesitated. "About 15 years ago, there was a big corporate housekeeping initiative. We were digitizing old records, shredding redundant paperwork. He personally supervised the disposal of the Dubois-Montgomery files. He thought he got everything." "He thought?" Genevieve pressed her voice, trembling. "He missed one thing. A box. Mislabeled as early tax assessments, 1998, 1999. It got sent to a long-term storage facility in Queens, not the shredder. I was the one who processed the transfer order. I always wondered what was really in it." He gave her an address and a storage unit number. "He has no idea it exists. Be careful. He's a vindictive man." The line went dead. A new surge of adrenaline of hope cut through Genevieve's despair. It was a long shot, a ghost from the past offering a lifeline. "Diana, change course. We're going to Queens." The storage facility was a bleak, sprawling complex of corrugated steel doors under a grey sky. It smelled of damp concrete and rust. It was the complete opposite of Omnibank's polished marble floors. Using the information from the caller, Diana managed to convince the weary facility manager to grant them access, citing a clerical error in the disposal schedule. They found Unit C218 at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The manager unlocked the roll-up door with a screech of protesting metal. Inside, shrouded in dust and cobwebs, were stacks of brown cardboard boxes, all bearing the old MGE logo. For the next few hours, they tore through the boxes. It was a dry, tedious search through years of forgotten financial data. Dust filled the air, clinging to their clothes and hair. Genevieve's hope began to fade with the daylight. And then, at the very bottom of the last box, she found it. It wasn't a formal document. It was a small, leather-bound journal. Her journal. The one she had kept during that first frantic year of building the company. Her hands shaking, she opened it. Inside, in her own youthful handwriting, were meticulous notes of their early meetings, her strategic ideas and detailed entries about her father's inheritance. And tucked into a flap at the back, perfectly preserved, were 2 documents. The first was a carbon copy of the original Dubois-Montgomery partnership agreement. The second was a faded photograph of her and a young beaming Harrison standing on the deck of their very first freighter, the Genevieve D. On the back, in Harrison's own bold handwriting, were the words, "To Jen, my partner, the woman who made it all possible. We'll own the world together. H.M. 1998. It wasn't just a legal document. It was proof. It was the story. It was the truth in his own words. Tears streamed down Genevieve's face, washing away the dust and grime. They weren't tears of sadness, but of vindication. Harrison and Abernathy had tried to destroy the evidence at the bank, fighting a battle in the present. They had no idea the real ghost was waiting patiently in a forgotten tomb, ready to speak. The atmosphere in Courtroom 4B on Friday morning was electric. The gallery was overflowing. Every major news outlet had a correspondent present. The billionaire's divorce had morphed into the corporate trial of the decade. Harrison Montgomery III arrived flanked by Abernathy and a phalanx of junior lawyers. His confidence was back tenfold. He strode in like a conquering hero, nodding curtly to acquaintances in the gallery. He and Abernathy had spent the last 36 hours laying the groundwork for their narrative. The bank flood, the unfortunate loss of records, and a series of strategic leaks to friendly journalists, painting Genevieve as mentally unstable a woman, scorned, clinging to delusions of grandeur. He believed he had won. He had controlled the narrative, and the evidence was he believed nothing more than waterlogged pulp. When Genevieve and Diana Reyes entered, a hush fell. They looked composed, focused. Genevieve met Harrison's smug gaze with a look of calm, unnerving resolve. He gave her a condescending smirk, a final act of dismissal. Judge Carmichael entered, and the proceedings began. "Ms. Reyes," she said, her voice stern. "The court has been made aware of an incident at Omnibank. Mr. Abernathy has already filed a motion to dismiss your claim based on a lack of evidence. The floor is yours." Abernathy leaned back in his chair, a triumphant smile playing on his lips. This was his moment. Diana Reyes stood and approached the clerk, handing over a set of files. "Your Honor, we will not be contesting the motion regarding the contents of Safe Deposit Box 412. It is true that we were unable to access the box." Abernathy's smile widened. Harrison almost chuckled. It was over. "However," Diana continued, her voice amplifying in the suddenly quiet room, "the document in that box was not the only copy, nor is it our primary piece of evidence today." She turned to face Harrison and Abernathy directly. "For the last 2 days, the respondent and his counsel have been on a fishing expedition chasing a ghost. They attempted to obstruct justice by pressuring a financial institution into feigning an accident to destroy evidence." She let that hang in the air for a moment before turning back to the judge. "But they were looking in the wrong place. They assumed my client's contribution was merely financial. They, like the world, had forgotten her true role. She wasn't just the bank. She was the co-founder, the strategist." "Your Honor, we present to the court Exhibit A." An image flashed onto the large screens placed around the courtroom. It was a crystal-clear scan of Arthur Finch's ledger, showing the $750,000 wire transfer to Dubois Montgomery Shipping and Logistics. This demonstrates the initial capital. Objection, Abernathy leapt up. This proves War's nothing. A loan, perhaps. A gift between lovers. Overruled, the judge snapped. Sit down, Mr. Abernathy. Exhibit B, Diana announced. Another image appeared, the carbon copy of the original partnership agreement, signed by both Genevieve Dubois and Harrison Montgomery, clearly stating a 50-50 equity split in exchange for the capital. Harrison's face went rigid. The color began to drain from his cheeks again. This wasn't supposed to exist. A forgery, Abernathy bellowed, genuinely panicked now. A crude fake. Is it? Diana asked coolly. We have had the document authenticated by 3 separate experts, whose affidavits are included. The paper stock, the ink, the aging are all consistent with the document created in 1998. But perhaps Mr. Montgomery finds his own words more convincing. She paused, looking directly at Genevieve, who gave her a single firm nod. Your Honor, Diana said, her voice resonating with dramatic weight. We present our final piece of evidence, Exhibit C. A new image filled the screens. It was the photograph. A young, vibrant Genevieve and a handsome, smiling Harrison on the deck of a ship. It was an image of hope, of shared dreams. Then Diana zoomed in on the back of the photo. The inscription in Harrison's unmistakable bold handwriting was magnified for the entire room to see, to Jen, my partner, the woman who made it all possible. We'll own the world together. H.M. 1998. The courtroom fell utterly, completely silent. It was a silence so profound, it felt like a physical force pressing in on everyone. The smugness on Abernathy's face had dissolved into a mask of pure horror. The reporters were frozen, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screen, staring at the damning words. But all eyes were on Harrison Montgomery III. He stared at the screen, at his own youthful handwriting, at the promise he had made, and then systematically buried for 25 years. It was not just an inscription. It was a confession. It was the truth he had tried to erase, now broadcast for the entire world to see. The lie he had so carefully constructed the foundation of his entire identity as a self-made titan had been obliterated by a single forgotten photograph. He slowly turned his head to look at Genevieve, the woman he had dismissed as a quiet accessory, a piece of his history to be discarded. Her expression wasn't triumphant or smug. It was one of profound, sorrowful vindication. In that moment, he didn't see the aging, quiet wife he had tired of. He saw the brilliant, passionate girl he had once loved, the partner whose dreams he had stolen, the woman who had, with quiet, unbreakable resolve, just reclaimed her story. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Judge Carmichael finally spoke, her voice quiet, but filled with an undeniable authority that sealed Harrison's fate. Mr. Abernathy, she said, her gaze fixed on the ashen-faced lawyer. Do you have anything further to add? Or would you and your client like to reconsider your position? Harrison didn't hear her. He could only hear the echo of his own words. A ghost from the past declaring to the world that his entire Spinoza was built on a lie. The aftermath of the revelation was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. The moment Judge Carmichael adjourned the court to review the evidence in her chambers, a formality. At this point, the room detonated. Camera flashes strobed like lightning, reporters shouted frantic questions, and the carefully constructed world of Harrison Montgomery III imploded in real time. Harrison, is it true? Were you never the sole founder? Mr. Montgomery, what is your response to the evidence? Abernathy, will you be facing sanctions for misleading the court? Harrison was catatonic. His bodyguards formed a tight circle, pushing through the media frenzy, but for the first time his protective bubble seemed permeable, fragile. He stumbled once, his hand brushing against the polished wooden rail for support. And in that small moment of physical unsteadiness, the world saw the mighty Titan fall. His face broadcast live across the globe was a ruin of shock and public humiliation. By the time he reached his car, the financial markets had already begun to react. MGE was a publicly traded company, and its stock was inextricably linked to the cult of personality Harrison had built around himself. The story of the self-made genius was its bedrock. Now that bedrock was revealed to be sand, traders on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange were shouting, selling, panicking. The ticker for MGE, which had been a steady climbing green for years, turned a blood red and began to plummet. With every passing minute, Harrison Montgomery's net worth was evaporating by the tens, then hundreds of millions of dollars. The empire he had spent a lifetime building on a lie was being dismantled by the truth in a matter of hours. Genevieve and Diana were escorted out a different exit, away from the worst of the chaos. In the quiet sanctuary of their car, there was no celebration, no triumphant cheers. There was only the heavy, somber weight of a victory that had cost so much. Genevieve stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, not seeing them. "It's done," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's just the beginning," Diana corrected her gently. "He'll be forced to settle now, to acknowledge your stake. You're about to become one of the most powerful women in the country, Genevieve." The thought was dizzying. For 25 years, her power had been derivative, reflected off her husband. Now, it would be her own. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. That evening, the reckoning came. Harrison sequestered in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park. A view that now seemed to mock him was in a state of pure, distilled rage. He had fired Abernathy in a screaming tirade that could be heard through the sound-proofed doors. He had smashed a priceless Ming vase against a wall. Now he sat in the dark, watching the news channels play the clip of his own handwriting on a loop, each repetition another nail in his coffin. His phone rang. It was the lead director of the MGE board. The voice on the other end was cold, devoid of the usual deference. "Harrison, we have an emergency board meeting scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. We've seen the evidence presented in court. We are deeply concerned about the investor confidence crisis this has triggered. We need you to explain this." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Defeated, he did the one thing he swore he would never do. He called Genevieve. She answered on the second ring. "What do you want, Harrison?" Her voice was steady, devoid of the fear he had relied on for decades. His voice was a ragged mess of fury and desperation. "What have you done, Genevieve? You've ruined me. You've destroyed the company, our company." "Our company," she repeated the words sharp. "You erased that word from our vocabulary 25 years ago. Harrison, you erased me. I didn't destroy the company. I just told the truth. The lie you built is what's destroying it." "I'll fight you," he snarled. "I'll drag this out for years. I'll bury you in appeals. You'll never see a single share." "No, you won't," she said calmly. "Because you can't. The board will remove you by lunchtime tomorrow to stop the bleeding. Your reputation, the only thing that ever truly mattered to you, is gone. You have no leverage left. You have only one move to make." He was silent, the terrible truth of her words sinking in. "Acknowledge my 50% ownership," she continued, her voice like steel. Issue a joint statement with me. We will present a united front to stabilize the company. We will announce a new leadership structure. I will take a seat on the board. We will save our company, Harrison. Not for you, but for the thousands of people it employs, and for the son we raised. It was a masterstroke. She wasn't just claiming her stake. She was seizing control, positioning herself as the savior of the company he had nearly destroyed. She was offering him a way to avoid complete and utter ruin, but on her terms. The price was his throne. He could hear the clinking of ice in his glass. He was a king in a penthouse prison, staring at the wreckage of his reign. The power, the fear he inspired, the legacy, it had all been a house of cards. And the woman he had tried to discard had just demonstrated a strength and strategic brilliance he had refused to see, the very qualities that had made him fall for her in the first place. "You planned this," he whispered, a note of grudging, horrified respect in his voice. "All of it. You taught me how to think strategically." "Harrison," she replied, a hint of sorrow in her tone. "You just forgot that I was listening." The fallout was not confined to the stock market. It was a contagion that ripped through the upper echelons of Montgomery Global enterprises. The emergency board meeting called for 8 a.m. The following day took place not in the grand MGE boardroom, but in the sterile, neutral territory of their outside counsel's office. It was a clear signal this was no longer Harrison's house. He arrived looking haggard, a phantom of the titan he had been just 2 days prior. The deference he had commanded for a quarter century had evaporated. The board members' men whose children's tuitions he had indirectly paid, whose careers he had made, looked at him with the cold, pragmatic eyes of surgeons excising a tumor. Frank Lowell, the lead independent director, a man Harrison had once considered a friend, spoke first. His voice was devoid of emotion. "Harrison, the damage to shareholder confidence is catastrophic. The market capitalization has fallen by 38% in less than 24 hours. Our creditors are calling. The narrative you built the company on has been proven fraudulent. The board has unanimously lost confidence in your ability to lead." "This is my company," Harrison snarled, a flash of his old arrogance flaring up. "Legally." Lowell countered, his voice like chipping ice. "It appears it is only half your company, and right now that half is in freefall along with ours. Your personal scandal is threatening to bankrupt us all. The board is prepared to invoke the moral turpitude clause in your contract to remove you for cause, or you can tender your resignation, effective immediately." Harrison stared around the table, looking for a single ally, a single friendly face. He found none. He saw only grim, calculating men saving their own skins. He was no longer a person to them. He was a liability on a balance sheet. Defeated, he slumped in his chair. The fight was over. While Harrison was being formally dethroned, Diana Reyes and a team of Genevieve's newly hired corporate lawyers were finalizing the terms. It was a masterclass in leverage. Genevieve didn't just want her 50% stake. She wanted control to protect her asset. By the end of the day, the deal was struck. Harrison would retire for health reasons. Genevieve Dubois would be appointed chairwoman of the board, and to signal stability and a clear line of succession, their son Robert Montgomery, a highly respected analyst who had deliberately built his career at a rival firm to escape his father's shadow, would be brought in as the new CEO. 6 months later, the MGE Tower was a different world. The intimidating dark decor Harrison had favored was replaced with glass, steel, and light, fostering a sense of transparency the company desperately needed. The atmosphere, once thick with fear, was now charged with a nervous but palpable optimism. Genevieve's first month had been a trial by fire. Many of the old guard, Harrison's loyalists, viewed her as a vindictive ex-wife who had stumbled into power. They were prepared to stonewall her, to manage her, until she grew bored and retreated to her penthouse. They fundamentally misunderstood her. In her first board meeting as chairwoman, she didn't make a grand emotional speech. She came armed with data. She had spent weeks in deep dives with divisional heads, analysts, and even factory floor managers. She presented a new strategic directive, MGE Horizon, aimed at divesting from politically volatile resource extraction, Harrison's pet projects, and pivoting aggressively into sustainable infrastructure and renewable energy tech. "This isn't about politics," she stated calmly, her voice resonating in the stunned silence of the boardroom. "It's about survival. The market is shifting. The regulatory landscape is changing. Harrison's model was based on 19th century assets, propped up by 21st century financial engineering. It's a dinosaur. If we don't evolve, we will go extinct." She fielded their hostile, skeptical questions with unnerving precision, quoting market projections and operational efficiency stats from memory. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, the skepticism in the room had been replaced by a grudging, astonished respect. The woman they had dismissed was a visionary. Her partnership with Robert was the key to the transition. He had his father's ambition and charisma, but his mother's meticulous intellect and empathy. He was the perfect bridge between the old guard and the new vision. "They're calling you the Velvet Hammer," Robert told her one evening as they stood in her new office overlooking the sprawling city. "Is that a compliment?" Genevieve asked, a small smile playing on her lips. "From this crowd, it's the highest praise imaginable," he said. He gestured to the organized chaos of reports and blueprints on her desk. "Dad's desk was always clean. He gave orders. You build things." He paused, his expression turning serious. "I never understood how you stayed with him for so long, Mom. But now, seeing you here, seeing how your mind works, I think I finally understand. You weren't just staying with him. You were waiting." The observation hit Genevieve with the force of a revelation. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps some part of her buried deep had always known this day of reckoning would come. One of Robert's first acts as CEO was to have his father's personal effects cleared from the office. In the back of a deep credenza tucked away in a dusty corner, a junior staffer found a small, forgotten box. He brought it to Genevieve. Inside was a collection of old memorabilia. Harrison had kept cufflinks, old awards, and at the bottom the leather-bound journal she had filled during their first year. He had taken it from their home years ago, a trophy of his conquest. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Tucked into the back flap was the photograph that had sealed her victory. The image of 2 young, hopeful people on the deck of the Genevieve D. She took the photo out and placed it not on her desk for all to see, but on a small bookshelf next to a window facing her. It wasn't a trophy of her win over Harrison. It was a reminder of the woman she had been, the partner she had always been, and the promise that was finally being fulfilled. Her life was no longer about him. Harrison was a ghost living out his days in a self-imposed, gilded exile. He was a footnote in the story of the company he once ruled. The narrative now belonged to her. Looking at the photograph, at the vibrant young woman with dreams in her eyes, Genevieve felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer just Genevieve Dubois, the wronged wife. She was Chairwoman Dubois, the leader. She hadn't just won a divorce case. She had reclaimed her life, her legacy, and her name. And that name was now rightfully and forever on the door. The story of Genevieve Dubois is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of rising to the surface. It's a story of quiet strength, strategic patience, and the reclamation of one's own narrative. For 25 years, she was a ghost in her own life, her contributions erased by the man she loved. But in the end, her name was not just remembered. It was rightfully restored to the empire she helped build. It proves that real power isn't about the loudest voice in the room, but the steadiest hand and the truest heart. What did you think of Genevieve's ultimate move? Was it justice or the perfect revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of vindication and empowerment, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life dramas just like this.